4:22 a.m., December 7, 2025. North Atlantic. 800 feet below the surface, $1.6 billion of Vladimir Putin's naval power is dying in the dark. The Russian Navy's newest Yasen M class attack submarine, K-573 Novosibirsk, hasn't just been hit, it has been broken. Its 390-foot hull is snapped cleanly in half like a dry twig. But the terrifying part for Moscow isn't the wreck itself, it's the method of its destruction. No carrier strike group, no nuclear depth charges, no grand armada. The post-battle acoustic data and satellite intel all point to the same conclusion. Russia's most advanced, invisible submarine was hunted, disabled, and killed by a single British boat in a swarm of expendable drones that cost less than a used Toyota. This is a speculative, near-future scenario, but it is built on real platforms, real constraints, and technologies already being tested. And if anything close to this ever plays out in the real world, it doesn't just change a battle, it rewrites naval warfare in the economics behind it. 7 minutes earlier, at 4:15 a.m., the freezing black waters north of the Shetland Islands are deceptively calm. Far below, at a crushing depth of 800 feet, the Royal Navy's HMS Ambush hangs motionless in the water. She is an astute-class hunter-killer submarine, one of the quietest machines humans have ever built. Her sonar suite is so sensitive that under ideal conditions, it can catch the faint echo of a small boat's propeller from tens of miles away. But tonight, the operators aren't listening for fishing boats or whales. They are staring at a faint, ghostly smear on their waterfall displays, the disrupted trace of something large and incredibly quiet. The contact is K-573 Novosibirsk, a Yasen M class nuclear attack submarine, and on paper, the apex predator of the Russian underwater fleet. At almost 400 feet long and around 13,800 tons submerged, her hull is wrapped in thousands of rubberized anechoic tiles designed to soak up sonar energy like a sponge. From the outside, she's meant to be a hole in the water. No echoes, no reflections, no trail. Inside Novosibirsk, Captain Volkov is probably sipping strong black tea, secure in the belief that he's invisible. The boat is running in silent mode at a crawl of 5 knots. The MGK-600 Irtish Amphora sonar suite, capable in theory of tracking dozens of contacts, shows an empty ocean. To Volkov, he's the hunter in a deserted sea. He's wrong. HMS Ambush has been riding his thermal wake like a shadow for the past 43 minutes. The British commander knows exactly what he's up against. 32 vertical launch cells for Kaliber and Onyx cruise missiles, enough firepower to flatten a small city or threaten a NATO carrier strike group. In a straight, symmetrical duel, the Yasen M arguably holds the edge. It's faster, it can dive deeper, and it carries more weapons. The British commander has no interest in a straight duel. Instead of a classic torpedo ambush, which would pit British torpedoes against Russian countermeasures in a familiar playbook, the commander is about to test a theory naval analysts have argued about for half a decade. Can cheap, networked, semi-autonomous systems tip the balance against exquisitely engineered platforms? He reaches for the communications handset and gives an order that appears nowhere in any existing NATO tactical doctrine. 3 simple words. Lease the Hounds. Tube 2 floods on HMS Ambush. A compressed air impulse punches a Spearfish heavyweight torpedo into the North Atlantic's black water. This is not a delicate tool. Spearfish is a 2-ton, 4,000-pound underwater sledgehammer driven by a gas turbine engine, capable of sprinting at over 80 knots, about 92 miles per hour underwater. But the tactical twist isn't the weapon itself, it's how it's employed. Instead of approaching in silence, the British weapons officer immediately orders Spearfish into loud, active sonar mode. Its nose cone starts blasting powerful sonar pings into the ocean at deafening levels. In an instant, Novosibirsk's illusion of safety shatters. On the Russian control room, the hydrophone operator stares unbelievingly at a growing spike of noise racing towards them. Volkov has spent his life training to make his submarine as quiet as possible. Now, in one instant, he is forced to abandon stealth completely. He has a single option left from the old Soviet playbook: run. He orders full power. The reactor's coolant pumps roar to life, and the Yasen M lunges from 5 knots to nearly 28. Its massive 7-bladed propeller digs into the water, throwing off a maelstrom of bubbles and cavitation. The submarine has gone from whisper to jackhammer in seconds. Every microphone in the ocean now knows where it is, but Volkov is gambling on speed, agility, and his defensive suite. From the stern, the Russian crew begins ejecting MG-74 Korund acoustic decoys. These are clever underwater noisemakers, effectively robotic loudspeakers, designed to mimic the acoustic signature of Novosibirsk, its propeller noise, machinery hum, and other unique sonic fingerprints. To an incoming torpedo seeker, they scream, "I am the target, hit me instead." On HMS Ambush, the torpedo data streams back along the fiber optic wire. The British weapons officer watches as the Russian boat accelerates, turns sharply to starboard, and drops to a deeper thermal layer to hide in the complicated acoustics near the shelf. He can see the decoys blooming behind it, each one trying to seduce the British torpedo off target. And then he does something counterintuitive. He doesn't steer Spearfish directly at the Russian hull. He runs it deliberately wide, using it like a sheepdog harassing a flock. The torpedo becomes a very loud, very dangerous herder, nipping at Volkov's heels and pushing him along a predictable escape corridor. Volkov, understandably, believes he's dodging a kill shot. In reality, he's being guided. By accelerating to nearly 30 knots and vomiting a chain of decoys into the water, he's made the one move the Royal Navy and its partners wanted. He's given up stealth in exchange for speed and created a noisy, traceable highway of disturbed water. Even more critically, his focus is fixated on the immediate threat behind and below him. He's no longer paying attention to what might be waiting above and ahead. That's where the Norwegians enter the story. Roughly 3,000 feet above, a Norwegian P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft circles silently well outside the range of Russian short-range air defenses. The crew aren't trying to chase Novosibirsk from behind. That's impossible from the air. Instead, they're doing math. Feeding in the last known position, course, speed, and maneuvering limits at a Yasen M, they project Volkov's likely escape vector minutes ahead. When the plot stabilizes, the weapons bay doors open and 2 slender pods tumble into the sea ahead of the fleeing submarine. As they hit the water, the pods split open and disgorge something that until recently belonged in research labs, not war plans. SG-1 Fathom autonomous loitering munitions, a fictional but plausible evolution of existing underwater gliders and mine systems. The SG-1s aren't classic torpedoes, they're closer to robotic sea mines with a brain. Each is a compact, low-cost undersea drone with a modest warhead, advanced wake sensing instruments, and a simple but robust AI core. Instead of chasing Novosibirsk, they fan out and form a loose, drifting kill zone directly across her predicted path. Real-world prototypes of this logic already exist. Gliders used by oceanographers, DARPA's wake homing concepts, and autonomous swarming behavior in aerial drones. In this scenario, Norway and the UK have weaponized that entire toolkit. They are not trying to outrun Volkov. They are building an underwater ambush that waits for him to run into it. Volkov, for his part, is not passive. He knows how to deal with a pursuing torpedo. Russia has invested heavily in a capability Western submariners envy: hard-kill anti-torpedo defenses. From countermeasures 5 and 6, he orders the launch of the packet NK system. Unlike the MG-74 decoys, these are not just distractions, they are interceptors. 2 small, highly maneuverable torpedoes blast into the water, guided by their own high-frequency sonar. They search for the screaming signature of the British Spearfish and lock on. The closing speed is terrifying. Spearfish bears down at over 80 knots, the packets sprint at around 50. The 2 streams of metal and explosives converge at a combined speed exceeding 140 miles per hour.
On HMS Ambush, the weapons officer watches telemetry with clenched jaw. The interceptors have locked on to the Spearfish. It's too late to evade. The packet warheads use proximity fuses. They don't need to hit Spearfish dead on, only get close. A violent underwater explosion tears through the water column. For a moment, shockwaves ripple across the seafloor. Volkov has done it. He swatted away one of the most advanced torpedoes in NATO's arsenal. In the Russian control room, the mood shifts from fear to fierce satisfaction. Now it's their turn. Without waiting, Volkov snaps an order. Snapshot, Tube 1, bearing 270. A Physic 1 heavyweight torpedo, a modern Russian analog to Spearfish, launches down the bearing of Ambush's firing transient. It's essentially a blind shot, guided by initial wire commands and some targeting logic. But at 60 knots with a large warhead, blind is still deadly. On HMS Ambush, confidence evaporates. Their sheepdog is gone, and a Russian weapon is now rushing toward them. The British commander orders extreme evasion, a hard turn to port and a sharp dive. The maneuver is so aggressive they're forced to cut their own guidance wires to avoid entanglement. In that instant, they surrender much of their situational awareness. For a tense 2 minutes, the roles reverse. The Russian boat, with its superior top speed, starts to open the gap. Volkov pushes his reactor past recommended limits to reach over 30 knots. The submarine rattles under stress. He believes he is escaping the engagement envelope, having neutralized the incoming threat and put the British on the defensive. But in his aggression and in the acoustic chaos of his own defenses, Volkov makes a critical, if understandable, error. By detonating the Spearfish with the packet interceptors and then launching a high-speed torpedo at Ambush, he has turned the local section of the ocean into an acoustic war zone. Shockwaves, cavitation, metallic shrieks in sonar pings echo everywhere. On human sonar consoles, it's a blur. Operators are effectively blind for crucial moments, their ears overwhelmed by reverberations. Volkov assumes this noise is masking his escape. In reality, he has just created the ideal hunting ground for the SG-1 Fathoms. While the large combatants are fixated on each other's torpedoes and decoys, the 12 SG-1s have already slipped into the disturbed wake above. Their Helsing-style AI wasn't built primarily for crystal-clear water and textbook conditions. It was trained, at least in this speculative scenario, on messy, noisy, real ocean data, where ships, storms, and seafloor reflections all mix. Traditional sonar relies heavily on clear frequency returns. In the current chaos, that's almost useless to a human. The drones, however, aren't listening in the same way. They're feeling. Volkov's escape maneuver, a high-speed turn and sprint to over 30 knots, has carved a massive hydrodynamic scar in the water. That turbulent wake is not just bubbles and noise, it's a signature of pressure changes, swirling vortices in micro-eddies that can be detected and tracked. Wake homing is not science fiction, it's a concept that has been explored for decades. SG-1s leverage this. They use compact pressure sensors, magnetometers, and wake sensing algorithms to detect the giant metallic body rushing through the water well before their short-range sonar sees it. In this chaotic, bubbly environment, traditional acoustic communications would be unreliable, so the drones fall back on short-range, high-frequency magnetic induction links, essentially underwater whispers of shifting magnetic fields, to share minimal data. They don't need a long, complex conversation. Their AI runs a pre-programmed, simple wolfpack behavior. Once a valid wake and metallic hull signature are confirmed, they split into two functional groups and attack the submarine from complementary angles. Below, Novosibirsk continues its desperate climb toward survival. The water seems to be quieting again. The British torpedo that had been chasing them is gone, replaced by the fading echoes of explosions. Volkov starts to believe he has shaken his enemies. Then, on the Russian sonar screens, something impossible appears. Multiple small contacts at very short range, closing from directions that make no sense. They're too slow and too small to be standard torpedoes, but there are too many of them, and they're far too close. Group Alpha of the SG-1s dives deeper to come up from below. Group Beta loops wider and angles toward the stern. When Alpha strikes, they don't aim for the pressure hull directly. Their target is the submarine's external control surfaces, rudders and stern planes, the fins that keep the boat properly trimmed. One SG-1 slams into the port stern plane and detonates its small warhead. The explosion doesn't blow open the hull. Instead, it warps and jams the hydraulic actuator. Suddenly, the stern plane freezes with a 15-degree rise angle. Inside, the Novosibirsk's nose lurches upward as the submarine's trim goes violently out of balance. The boat starts to climb unintentionally toward the surface, faster than Volkov wants. He orders emergency ballast adjustments and tries to fight it with thrust and remaining control surfaces. That corrective command is exactly what Group Beta has been waiting for. As Volkov orders reverse thrust to kill his upward momentum and avoid a breach, the giant 7-bladed propeller reverses pitch. For a brief moment, water flow over the blades stalls and becomes more chaotic than usual. 3 SG-1s dart into this exposed zone in a tight triangle formation and detonate among the spinning blades. The noise is sickening, the screech of precision-milled bronze and composite blades meeting high explosives at several hundred revolutions per minute. 2 propeller blades are shattered near their roots. The drive shaft, suddenly off balance by the missing mass, begins to whip violently inside its tunnel. Vibrations hammer through the hull. In the engineering room, the reduction gears shriek as teeth shear off cogs. The engineering officer, realizing the reactor and shaft could both be destroyed catastrophically, punches the scram button, shutting the reactor down in an emergency to save the core from further mechanical damage. In less than a minute, Novosibirsk goes from apex predator to crippled hulk. Propulsion is lost, the propeller shaft vibration is critical, the reactor is scrammed cold. With a jammed stern plane forcing her bow up and no thrust, the submarine becomes a powerless object, slowly drifting upward along the course the drones have forced her into. Volkov has defeated the obvious threat, the British Spearfish, only to be carved apart by a dozen cheap robotic ants he never even detected in time. 2 miles away, HMS Ambush has ridden out its own crisis. The Russian Physic 1 torpedo, chasing what it thought was the British submarine, is lured off by British decoys and detonates harmlessly far astern. Ambush stabilizes, regains depth control, and slowly brings her sonar back online as the acoustic storm settles. The picture that emerges is sobering and strangely quiet. Where a menacing Yasen M was sprinting minutes ago, now there is a large contact drifting slowly upward, bleeding no propeller noise at all. The distinct cavitation roar is gone, replaced by the faint, uneven creaks of a wounded hull. The British commander understands what has happened. The Hounds have done their work. He also knows that while the submarine is crippled, it is not yet neutralized. A damaged nuclear boat, if it can surface and be towed home, still has propaganda and deterrence value, and leaving it afloat risks rescue, salvage, and intelligence being recovered by the enemy. So he gives a final conventional order. Tube 1, match bearings, shoot. A second Spearfish leaves the tube, this time on a silent, steady approach. There are no more packet interceptors coming. The violent mechanical shock that shattered the propeller has also likely blown out hydraulic lines feeding the external countermeasure tubes. Doors are warped, actuators are frozen. Novosibirsk is deaf, paralyzed, and nearly blind. Volkov can see his depth gauge ticking upward and may suspect what's coming, but he no longer has the sensors or weapons to stop it. The second Spearfish doesn't waste itself smashing directly into the hull. British doctrine, like that of other modern navies, aims for maximum structural damage using physics. The torpedo dives beneath the target and detonates its 660-pound warhead about 12 feet under the keel. The result is brutal and elegant. The explosion creates a massive gas bubble beneath the submarine, momentarily lifting the 13,800-ton hull out of the surrounding water. For a split second, the bow and stern hang in mid-water, unsupported, while the center rides on the bubble. Then the bubble collapses. Gravity slams the vessel back down, bending the hull like a bow until its steel spine snaps. Novosibirsk ceases to be a warship and becomes 2 tumbling heaps of metal sinking into darkness.
Seawater floods in, extinguishing fires and rapidly cooling the reactor. Within minutes, the North Atlantic returns to near silence. The tactical engagement is over. But the real shockwaves from this hypothetical Operation Arctic Fox don't move through water, they move through Moscow's war rooms, shipyards, and balance sheets. Because if you step back from the drama and look at this kill in cold, strategic terms, the loss of Novosibirsk is more than a sunken hull. It's a cascading catastrophe that unfolds across multiple levels: military capability, industrial capacity, psychological deterrence, and economic logic. At the most obvious level, Russia has lost a frontline strike platform. A Yasen M isn't a patrol boat, it's one of the crown jewels of the fleet. Those 32 vertical launch cells, when loaded with Caliber or Onyx missiles, provide long-range strike options against carrier groups, port facilities, power plants, or critical infrastructure thousands of kilometers away. One submarine on patrol can complicate NATO planning across an entire theater. Take it off the board, and that whole area becomes safer for convoys, amphibious groups, and logistics. From a pure force-on-force perspective, the West has traded one manned submarine's risk and a handful of relatively cheap experimental drones for a major chunk of Russia's blue water offensive capability. The second level is industrial, and this is where the wound becomes harder to heal. Submarines like Yasen M are not commodities that can simply be reordered. They take years to design, years to build, and they require intricate supply chains. Even before the war in Ukraine and subsequent sanctions, the Yasen M program suffered repeated delays and spiraling costs. The quietest propellers and reduction gears depend on ultra-precise machine tools. Many of those tools, or at least their key components, high-end cutting heads, bearings, control electronics, originated in Germany, Japan, and other advanced industrial economies. Reactor control systems, specialized alloys, and complex microelectronics were never fully domestically sourced. This is not unique to Russia. Most modern militaries are more globally dependent than they like to admit. But in Russia's case, recent sanctions have strangled much of that foreign pipeline. In this scenario, Novosibirsk is likely one of the last Yasen M boats assembled with pre-war stocks of foreign precision components. Sevmash shipyard in Severodvinsk can certainly keep welding steel and producing submarines, but replacing a Yasen M is not just about building another hull, it's about reproducing the same level of quieting, automation, reliability, and combat systems integration using a degraded, partially sanctioned industrial base. Any follow-on boats would almost certainly be louder, less reliable, and more maintenance-intensive. In undersea warfare, louder is not a small downside. It's the difference between predator and prey. Realistically, Russia might need the better part of a decade and massive investment to rebuild anything close to the original industrial capability, assuming it can secure alternative suppliers or bootstrap domestic equivalents, both of which are non-trivial under sanctions and financial pressure. The third level is strategic psychology, the fleet-in-being problem flipped on its head. On paper, Russia still has other Yasen-class and modernized submarines in port, battered but afloat. In theory, they exist as a deterrent. As long as they can sail, NATO must allocate ships, aircraft, and resources to counter them. But after an episode like this, every time a Yasen M leaves Murmansk, the Kremlin has to ask, are we sending out a deterrent or donating another $1.6 billion hulk to the seabed? If the leadership becomes gun-shy, the submarines spend more time in fortified pens than on patrol. A submarine that never leaves harbor is functionally no different than a museum exhibit. It shows up on paper strength reports, but has almost zero operational impact. By proving that a single NATO boat and a set of expendable drones can gut a supposedly elite Russian asset, the Allies don't just remove one sub, they cast a shadow of doubt on the entire category. The fourth level is economic logic and adaptation. This is where the scenario becomes less about Russia versus NATO and more about what 21st century warfare looks like in general. We're used to thinking in terms of prestige platforms, carriers, fifth-generation fighters, stealth bombers, nuclear submarines. These are systems measured in billions of dollars and decades of development, and they are politically and emotionally loaded. careers, doctrines, and national pride attached to them. But in this fight, most of the decisive work was done by assets that are closer in spirit to consumer technology than to Cold War capital ships: AI-enhanced undersea drones derived from research gliders, commercial-grade sensors hardened for military use, and a rope of software updates pushing new tactics into old hulls without physically rebuilding them. Compare the cost curve. A Yasen M is a multi-billion-dollar investment when you include R&D, supporting infrastructure, and decades of crew training. An SG-1 class undersea loitering munition, if it were real, would probably cost in the low hundreds of thousands per unit at scale, perhaps even less, because it's small, relatively simple, and built largely from dual-use components. Lose one, and you've lost a car or small house in budgetary terms. Lose 12, you've lost a suburban street. Sink a Yasen M with them, and you've just traded a few cars for a strategic asset that might be impossible to fully replace for years. That is the kind of exchange ratio that keeps defense planners awake at night. If you zoom out even further, this scenario highlights a simple, uncomfortable truth about modern conflict. Innovation cycles are diverging. Nations can take 15 to 20 years to design, fund, and field a new manned submarine class, but the algorithms and sensors that guide cheap autonomous systems can iterate in months. A software update, a new sensor fusion algorithm, a better wake detection neural network, these can be fielded on existing hardware far faster than any navy can redesign a steel hull. Whoever can ride that fast, cheap innovation loop more effectively will not just win battles, they will reshape what power projection even means. Naval power used to be about how many tons of steel you could sail. Increasingly, it's about how quickly you can turn lines of code and cheap silicon into intelligent, distributed weapons. There's one last level to this: doctrine and mindset. For over a century, submariners have trained to think in terms of noise discipline, torpedo versus torpedo duels, and the geometry of deep-water engagements. Operation Arctic Fox, as imagined here, breaks that mental model. The British submarine didn't win the duel in the classic sense. It never needed to. Instead, it played the role of bait and shepherd, shaping Volkov's path into a carefully designed kill zone where small, cheap systems could do the dirty work. This is closer to combined arms thinking in land warfare, tanks fixing the enemy while artillery and drones destroy them, than the traditional image of a one-on-one underwater knife fight. That's where the real value add of this story lies. It isn't a piece of fan fiction about British kit beating Russian kit. It's a lens on how war at sea is being transformed by three converging forces: the globalized, fragile nature of high-end industrial supply chains, the rise of cheap, intelligent, distributed weapons that can exploit that fragility, and the speed of software-driven adaptation compared to steel and steam. Whether the exact details of SG-1 Fathoms ever materialize is almost beside the point. Something like them, small, smart, numerous, and ruthless, is already on the horizon. If you found this breakdown of how a billion-dollar submarine can be outthought and outmaneuvered by a swarm of relatively simple robots interesting, and you want more realistic, deeply researched scenarios about how AI and autonomy are reshaping warfare, strategy, and deterrence, then stick around. This is where the future of conflict is being written, not just in shipyards and parliaments, but in code, algorithms, and the quiet spaces under the waves.